Scott.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Scott, you and I first met 10 years ago at Dropbox. It's been almost 10 years.
It's 10 years. Yeah, it's I think you started 2017. Yeah. It was like right in that run up to IPO. And
Yep.
Sure you remember it well.
I do, of course. And when I first met you, I think you just started leading the growth team. Why don't we talk a little bit about just the situation at Dropbox at the time and the work you're doing in that team?
Yeah, I think so I was leading the growth monetization team. I think importantly, Dropbox was one of the few companies that had like 10 million paying customers, like, hundreds of millions of users, billions of users, like, that's like social network status. Very few companies get to millions, much less tens of millions of paying users. And so what that meant was actually it was a very fertile ground for doing kind of bringing growth A/B test type of mentality to a paid business. And so our job was more or less to like experiment our way to like fast revenue growth, while still making sure the product, didn't oversell itself and making sure that customers retain for a very long time. And I think when I started, we were at 250 million ARR, and sometime 3 years later, when we went public, it was like 1.1 or something like that. And yeah, it was a great run. It was very, very fun.
When I first started working with you, one of the things that really struck me about you as an engineering leader is this balance between the mindset of building applications and serving end users and building infrastructure. And as you probably recall very well, at Dropbox, at least at that time, there was a little bit of a divide between the infra folks and the app folks, the app engineers, where the infra folks were very much like building distributed systems and like kind of building things, to use your word, correct. And the app folks felt like they were just, out there like serving users and, sort of driving innovation. And you straddled these lines incredibly well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really comes back to when I joined. So I had a startup and it got acquired into the infrastructure team for like essentially random reasons. And I got to like, that was where I got to cut my teeth, was like working alongside some of the best infrastructure engineers honestly in the history of Silicon Valley. And I think the good thing about that is I got to learn a lot really fast. I got to learn about like how do you make things correct and durable. But because I had been a startup guy, I kind of always had this like instinct toward how do we get to user value as fast as possible. And what I eventually came to realize is that infrastructure folks, they kind of take correctness as a zeroth order principle, and yet they are super user focused. I think this meme that infrastructure cares about infrastructure, most of the ones, at least at Dropbox, didn't. They cared about the user, the value that was coming from it. They just thought about it over a long time scale. And then product engineers kind of also cared about the user, but they thought about it on a very short time scale. And what I realized was actually we all just care about the same thing. We care about the user. And then my job kind of became, how do I bridge these two time scales and how do I tell a story that like unites the two and basically honors the work that infrastructure is doing, but also like pushes the product teams to move really fast. And so don't sacrifice correctness, but also don't sacrifice speed. And I eventually came to the personal conclusion, and I think this is kind of now de rigueur, like actually speed and correctness are highly correlated. Like it's not about like correctness. Moving slow is kind of definitionally incorrect in a lot of ways. It's like it feels like you're keeping correctness by moving really slow and being careful, but in practice, it just means you're missing the market and your product sucks.
Yeah. And that'll come back to your mindset when you build Metronome as well. But you're very effective at working across these teams and also working with the commerce engine, the commerce team that was there, where we had made choices along the way that were not oriented towards that speed.
I think most internal commerce billing teams, I think there's like kind of three problems that they have to confront. So first, it's like if you're joining Dropbox at 200 people, like, is it your first choice to work on billing? Almost certainly not. You're there to work on distributed sync. You're there to build a great UI, something like that. And so commerce becomes this like kind of like whoever draws the short straw. And at Dropbox at the early time when I joined in 2013, it was like I literally called it like the intern project, because every summer interns would come in, they would add to the billing system, they would leave, no one would own the billing system, and it would just like lie fallow for 9 months, and then a new crop of interns would come through, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like that isn't how you build a good piece of software, and that's through no fault of their own, but it was just kind of like Dropbox had bigger fish to fry at the time. Then flash forward to the run up to IPO, we're trying to move really fast. We're trying to like have revenue growth be predictable, but also fast growth. And the system that the interns had cobbled together over 10 years or 8 years, it, surprisingly, it didn't work that well. And in reality, what happened is that it did work, but it worked for the specific model that we had at the moment it was built. And then any deviations from that would break or would cause issues. And so my team, whose entire job was do pricing and packaging experiments to make this stuff work, we were kind of like the bad guys because we were like, oh, what if we charge $10 instead of $9? And then you do that and you have a huge sev and you misbill a bunch of users and you're like, ah, crap, let's go back to it. And so in some sense, we were the kind of chaos agents on top of the billing system and really put a lot of pressure on that team to kind of update from actually this isn't a system that's fixed. Actually, the value of the system is how quickly can you iterate on it. That was the kind of point of view that we represented in the org.
Yeah. So on the idea to start a company around this, what became Metronome, it wasn't just a set of observations around a commerce system and billing and that stuff. It was also a bet on consumption-based pricing and a sort of a sea change a bit in terms of how the economics would work for software companies going forward. What gave you that conviction?
Yeah, again, I think this is one of those things where because I was pretty naive, I had to use first principles to kind of reason about things. And it just turned out that like first principles were correct in this case. So the first principles for me were, well, okay, the internet's a thing. It's just 2019. I'm like, what if the internet was a thing? But then you go look at the data and you realize that the move from on-prem to cloud was like 20 to 30% done at that point. It was like most software was still on-prem in spite of the fact that Silicon Valley is like not that way at all. And you're like, okay, that's interesting. And there was this move happening in a sub part of the market, which was what I call infrastructure SaaS. So companies at the time would be like MongoDB, Snowflake, Elastic, Hashi. And what they had done is they had built businesses that were doing hundreds of millions of dollars in ARR, but they were all on-prem or on VPC. And they were all moving to the cloud. It was like 2019 was like roughly the era when like the cloud as infrastructure SaaS became a viable business model. And it's kind of nuts to say it because like imagine not having that be true now. But like this is 7 years ago. And actually most of like 100% of Hashi's revenue at the time was on-prem. But what we saw was they were trying to move to cloud. And when they were moving to cloud, the old business model of on-prem pricing, which is essentially a platform fee, made no sense because now everything about your COGS is elastic. Everything about the usage is elastic. And so you actually need a business model that is elastic. And that's where usage-based pricing came in. And so the math for me was like, okay, this big trend is happening. The internet, and it's like creating the cloud. And so like things are moving to the cloud, and actually we're weirdly early in that journey, and yet it's obviously taking off. And if that thing is true, if the move to the cloud is true, then the commercial model has to change. Like on-prem makes like flat fee perpetual licensing makes no sense. And so actually this has to happen. And then if you just do envelope math, roughly half of all software spend is infrastructure. And so you're like, well, then half the revenue in Silicon Valley will become usage-based. And yet 0% is usage-based today. And so you just kind of like draw the two lines. You're like, okay, like this is a big enough market. So, and no one was working on it. And so that was the kind of like initial like market. We could talk about AI in a minute, I'm sure, because it had a similar thing. But it was, that was the initial idea, was actually just like, it was like take the idea of the cloud just seriously. Like the second order effect of the cloud is usage-based pricing. That was kind of where we eventually got to.
So let's take a second to start about the very beginning of the company. You met Kevin at Dropbox. Yep. He had since left Dropbox and was sort of on leave, just sort of figuring out what he wanted to do next. And what caused you guys to want to work together? And then we'll talk about the CEDO.
Yeah. The secret is when I met him, I'm like, I will never start a company with you. Like that was the first thing that I said. I mean, I liked him as a friend, but God, we fought like dogs. And it was like one of these things where we were very competitive with each other and very like, it was kind of very like, friends. We played Magic the Gathering together and we'd always like compete and I'd always win, but it was always a fight. And it was like one of these things where I was like, I think he's super smart and I like him as an entrepreneur, but I don't know that we can work together collaboratively. And we never really worked together, even though we'd worked at Dropbox at the same time. And so the first thing that we did is we spent 3 months doing what I call like founder therapy, where we would go, I don't even know if you know this, but basically I was so skeptical. I was like, because he pitched me, he's like, we should work together.
Yep.
You're technical, I'm
That
not.
part I know.
And I was like, let's go. And so he convinced me, like, okay, let's try this out. And we did essentially founder therapy, where we would just go deep on each other's backgrounds. Like, why the hell are you doing this? Like, why are you insane? We'd both done startups before. We both knew it was horrible, but we couldn't stay away from it. Like, how do we do this? And so we spent a lot of time like de-risking that. We did this thing once where we were like, the thing that cemented me on it was basically, I'm like, I have this idea that I'm like, entrepreneurship is more or less getting the door slammed in your face like 10,000 times and then one person opens the door. So let's actually simulate this experiment. And so we basically got in a car, drove down to San Jose, and on the way, we're like, let's invent fake software that we just built. And we're like, and it was like, we were like driving and we're like, we saw a daycare and we saw like an accounting firm and we're like, okay, it's tax management software for back office small businesses. And then what we're going to go do is we're going to try to get rejected 50 times. So we drove to 50 different like businesses and just cold pitched them. And like, Kevin's much more gregarious, so he would lead usually. And then he'd push me to start leading. And we brought a bunch of Krispy Kremes and we'd give people donuts to kind of talk to us. And really what we're trying to do is just like, can we fail together? And is it horrible? Do we fight and do we hate each other, or do we like each other? Is it fun? And what we found was that it was just incredibly fun. Like we were just like rolling with it, having a ton of fun. We got the door slammed in our face 38 times, but we also got 3 job offers. And we were like, okay, this idea for this software sucks that we invented in 7 minutes. It's a terrible idea. Let's not do this ever. But like, we can do this. Like we can, or at least we can suffer together and we'll have fun doing it. And so that was the thing that like really flipped the bit for me. And then we went in earnest looking for an idea, but we probably spent 2 to 3 months like before we even talked about a single idea. It was mostly about founder fit.
When you guys approached me, so the announcement came out that I was leaving Dropbox and going to start a career in venture. You came to my office and you're like, "Hey, do you have a minute? I have this idea I want to bounce by you since you're going to venture."
Yeah.
And I'm like 3 minutes into this conversation, and I'm like, I have to. I have not started a journal catalyst yet, but I have to figure out how to go about this whole process. And the thing you might not know is, I'd hang up with you or Kevin, and I'd immediately call someone back at GC, being like, "Well, now what do I do?"
Yeah.
Because I'd never done the job
Yeah, of
before,
course.
right? So I'm also trying to figure it out for the first time. But you guys had the idea. It was baked at that point.
Mhm.
And the sort of inescapable reality of it. You guys were very good at convincing, and Kevin's like good at convincing people to
Mhm.
do stuff.
Yeah.
That I doubt. So what were those that first year or two? What was it like?
I mean, it was interesting, right? Because
Because COVID happened too.
when COVID happened, I think I'll take one micro step before COVID, which was like fundraising. I think, Kevin and I are both second-time entrepreneurs, and we both had like acqui-hires into Dropbox. Dropbox is a legit company. It was the kind of like on paper ideal founder duo, but like to be honest, the idea was toxic. Like you are the only person who offered a term sheet, and we were, and like I feel like honestly, it's insane that that's true because I was like, okay, like I've raised money before, I've done this before, like how is this possible? And basically the answer was the idea was so bad because everyone hated billing. Billing was this like toxic wasteland. Backwater is very funny because like I now have all these like notes from that time, and you talk to a venture partner and like, this is the worst idea, like do not do this. Several of them work at now they're customers of ours. They're like, we will never do usage-based pricing. It's never happened. Like actually the most striking one was I met like a super high up VP at Salesforce, and they're like, literally Salesforce will never do this. And then like fucking flash forward to 2 weeks ago, Salesforce is now purely headless, all usage, and I'm like, yeah, I think like we're on the right side of this one. But it was just like an exercise in like actually like this idea that like bad ideas might actually turn good is where the alpha is like I actually believe that more than anything. And it was like that first fundraise was brutal, and so I really appreciate you taking the bet on us. I think that that folded into, we raised money, but we didn't have a product. We didn't even have like an architecture. Like I had glimmerings of what the solution would look like. But the first things that we did, and then like literally a month after the like wire hit, COVID hit. And we were like, Kevin and I are very in-office people. And we're like, okay, I guess we're just doing this fully distributed. And we had hired no one at that point. And I still remember it because our first 3 people that we hired still work at Metronome. And the like way we would meet is it was that time in COVID where no one was wearing masks, but you would not shake hands. You just do like the elbow bump.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was how, and you're still in a cafe with like hundreds of other people. It's like very stupid. But it was like one of these things in retrospect, it was like kind of a surreal time. And we just, I don't know, like that first year and a half was just pure grind because the idea was clearly really early. Like we found our first paying customer within like 2 months, but our second paying customer took like 8 months after that. And so that was 8 months of like, I guess we're just going to build on that. Like this one customer we believe is actually a real market. And we just grinded through it. And then something in like the year and a half in, the infrastructure thesis started to become super obvious. HashiCorp was really interested, and they were a public company at the time. We're like, whoa, okay, if they're willing to like engage, this must be something real. And then we kind of signed this like set of deals that kind of kicked off the like infrastructure portion of our journey, which I would say was like began in 2021, and was how we got to like raising a Series A.
Yep, for sure. And then you guys built this technology very carefully because you have this principle that that speed of innovation, speed of adjusting the business model is not in conflict with correctness.
Right.
And you sort of observe some of that in your experience at Dropbox. How did that end up manifesting itself in the product that you built?
Yeah. So it's interesting because the first thing is kind of understanding the like, we're a company that offers a P100. Like, don't do that. Like SLA, you're allowed to like have 7 nines, but we were like, fuck it. We're just going to write P100 correctness as like our baseline. And we took this really bold stance because we believe that usage billing was really freaking hard. And we wanted to basically make a really strong statement to the market. And so when you take a P100 guarantee, you actually have to like really deeply understand how are you validating the correctness of everything that you do. And how do you build that like before you write a line of code, like what does that mean? And so, the ways that this manifested, the people we first hired were actually ridiculously more senior than most people's first hires because we needed people who had worked at New Relic, worked on databases at the like deepest level, because they embodied that. Now, the key is they also had to be silly enough to go work at a 2-person startup with no revenue. And so like the intersection of I am a deeply correctness oriented person and I'm willing to risk it all on black and like join a startup is like 5 people and we hired them. Like it was just like incredibly lucky. And I'm like incredibly grateful to that early team. So it started with the team. And then next thing was before you write any product, build any product, it is how do you prove correctness? Like, what does that mean? Like, how do you engage with that problem? And it'd be like if I was building a new database and I came to you and I'm like, cool, I have this database, it's 100% correct. Like, what would you do? What would you need to do to prove that correctness? And then basically applying that to a billing system. And so we invested a ton in tooling about like, again, literally just proving the correctness of the underlying data to ourselves first and then to customers. And what that means is that you actually are really slow to get into market actually for that first product because actually proving 100% correctness at any scale is like a really, really, really hard problem. And it's like also a problem that like, if you do it, you earn the right to sell the product. But it is incredibly easy to take a bunch of shortcuts in that first phase. And we just basically held a gun to our head and said, we're not allowed to take shortcuts. Like it has to be provably correct. And so we invested an incredible amount in that layer of our product. And honestly, it was one of the things that was our early bet was that this was actually a really hard distributed data problem. And we were going to build a team that was capable of building it. And so when we started to see success, we saw an incredible number of copycats, like 80. And I would just go to the LinkedIn and look at who the founding team was. And if the founding team wasn't legit, I was like, they're dead. And more or less that has been proven to be true.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those decisions, those early days, and this idea about correctness. It's completely true. You're between your customers and their revenue,
Yeah,
and you're also in between your customers and the relationship with their customers.
exactly.
Because if you make a misstep, that their customers aren't looking at you. Their customers are looking at your customers
Exactly.
and wondering what's wrong with them. And that now you've broken that contract, and so you
Exactly.
just can't afford to do it.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, exactly. We are invisible in this equation, right? Like
Yep.
if you use OpenAI, you use Metronome, you don't know it. If you're getting misbilled, it's because of us. And that's something that is incredibly sacred. And as you can imagine, getting like this is actually the signal that like we actually had something on our hands because like just from first principles, who in hell would trust three people to do this for them? It's like truly fundamentally kind of irrational. And that was how we knew something because people would trust us for that. And like, okay, if they're trusting us, that must be, they think it's a really hard problem. And so it's worth going after. And that was like the early, in retrospect, that was the sign that there was product market fit well before it actually showed up in terms of growth. But yeah, and we were relatively slow actually to recognize that.
Well, the customers, yeah. I mean, the customers that were betting on you were like real businesses,
Yes.
and that water flowing over your system. I mean, one of the things that gave me a lot of confidence in what you guys were doing over time was just that vote of confidence, and the fact that these businesses were running water over your systems, which were forging what you become. And I'm like, this could be, if this is going to work, there's no better condition for it to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, it was the first several years were just like, technically, can we do this? And will people trust us for this? And then this belief that if people did trust us, that eventually we'd become inevitable, right? And so it's like a high risk bet, but it shows up in GRR, it shows up in NRR, it shows up in just the retention, right? It's just like you just don't churn off of these systems, and once they work, and yeah, it's been incredible to get to work with customers for, like our oldest customers have been on the platform for 7 years at this point.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's definitely an outlier. At some point, your role changed, and we can go into whatever you're comfortable talking about there. But the thing I actually want to talk about the most in that is you had to unlearn some things and learn some new things, moving from CTO into a CEO.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere like 4-ish years in, it basically became necessary for Kevin to take a step back for health reasons, and I had to like, and like the only option was for me to step into the CEO role. I think there were some things that made that really easy, and then a bunch of things that made that interesting. So the things that made it easy was, I mean, at Dropbox, one of the things that I did was I ran all of engineering recruiting for a very long time, and so like recruiting is in my blood. And so what that meant is that like literally every single person at Metronome actually still was hired by me, like, or interviewed by
You
me
knew the
and
team
hiring. And it's
deeply.
like the team, was there, through me. And so that part, like I had the trust, like I had the mandate. The other thing that was true is that like, even as CTO, like, again, I'm kind of the erstwhile CTO where like you know, I'm good at some things, but I'm also like radically realistic about where I need the help of other people. And so while I would make all the technical decisions and I would make all the product decisions, it was always with the team. And it was always like, I was never I was not like the sole genius on the bench. In fact, I was like the dumbest person on the bench. And I think that actually helped because what that meant was my job became, I worked with everything. I worked with every customer. I worked with every salesperson. I was deeply in the field. I was the only product manager for the first like 3 years of the business, and I just did everything. I was kind of like the Renaissance person, and so then when it came time to step into the CEO role, it was definitely stressful, but like there was no thrash to the company. The company was like, yeah, okay, this makes sense. Customers, there was like, I think some theoretical risk, but I think we successfully navigated that by just like spending a lot of time with them and they knew my face already. And then the learnings front, I mean, I think, look, I always thought of myself as a founder. So like CTO, CEO, what's the difference? There's a lot of differences. I don't manage the board. I have no relationships with the board, but but I was a founder first, and like everything I did was for the best of the betterment of the company, and so that mental model held. But then coming in, there's a bunch of things that I had never done before, like run a board meeting or, really spend that much time with the board or investors. I had like cold start, no investor relationships. My ability to do sales or be the like main rainmaker in sales was completely questionable. And so I came in and I was like, oh wow, like I am I feel very like I will work my way through it. I'm a very first principles thinker. I'll figure it out. But at the same time, like, the core jobs of the CEO, raising money, managing the board, in this case, running sales, like I had never done. And so I basically just crash coursed on all of those things. And I credit to the team for helping both cover the product and engineering side during that phase, but secondarily, for helping teach me how to do this stuff. And Kevin was still on the board, so he was like coaching me through like enterprise sales and stuff like that. And you and the board were there for me every step of the way. And the board was like, and all investors were super supportive. And in a way, I think it actually ended up being pretty helpful for the business because we are a deeply technical product married to an enterprise sales motion. And it turns out that the person who built the product kind of is the best salesperson because if for technical products, because like you have all the credibility in the world. Like you can speak fluently to every level of the stack, how the value manifests to every single customer. And yes, you need to learn a bunch of stuff about how to run a sales process and stuff. But that's relatively easy. You have the mandate of heaven. And so you can do it. It's, not my favorite thing in the world, but it was totally learnable. And then investors and fundraising, I just learned on the battlefield, and there's no crash course for that, and it sucks and it's hard. But like you figure your way through it. Yeah.
And that was around the time also when AI was starting to take off.
Yep.
And you had some very notable early customers.
Yeah.
Did you kind of see what was coming?
Yeah, so we were the first billing system for OpenAI and Anthropic, and NVIDIA, and like on their AI products. And I think we got lucky with them. Like that was like a huge break because we knew people who knew people, and they were infrastructure companies at the time.
Mhm.
And this is 2022, so it was before ChatGPT. And so we got to work with them. But the thing that we saw was they were building something that was infrastructure, but like manifested in this case as like chat. And it was like this interesting thing. Like they were running themselves like infrastructure companies, but they were very clearly application AI companies. And so it was this interesting thing where you're like, oh, interesting. All the like mental models, all the things that we built for infrastructure as a service, they just fit like a freaking glove to these things that you used to think of as consumer applications. And that was the first inkling of like, oh, interesting. If this AI thing is real, actually all the prior models, and actually I think this even more strongly now, actually all the prior models around business models and how to run those businesses, it's actually like these businesses are hybrid application infrastructure businesses at their very core. And we were like, oh, interesting. Like it just worked. And so we saw that it was super early. There were no applications. This is pre-ChatGPT. But what we realized was, wow, the system we built for databases as service businesses works so well for this. We're like, this is awesome. It's like perfect product market fit with a market of literally two companies. And so that was happening. And then November 20, whenever ChatGPT 23 or 22, I can't remember which, but basically that November, it was November 30th. I'll never forget that. Basically we just started seeing our usage graphs just start to exponentiate. And it was like, if it exponentiates for one day, you're like, there's this chat message of like, wow, this OpenAI thing is like, this OpenAI company is
Ripping.
doing something.
Something's happening.
And something's wrong. And then it's like a week later and it's been exponentiating more. And it's like 2 weeks later and like, our AWS monthly bill is going to hit $1 million this month, and we only have like $7 million in the bank or $10 million in the bank. And their contract is for like hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, what are we going to do? And so we have this emergency board meeting. We're like, we're going to float them the money, like assume they're good for it and like figure it out. But basically on their side, what was happening is like 24/7 bucket brigade. They were having this like exponential of exponentials. And we were like this backing billing system. And we were just seeing these like growth rates that were just truly off the charts. And in that moment, you know, we were just on call for 3 months. Like it was truly like is one of those things where you know you over-engineer the system because no system should have been able to survive 4 orders of magnitude growth in 3 months. That's like actually just you really over-optimized. Like we took correctness to that level of thing, and it turned out to be a correct bet, completely randomly. And at the end of that, we kind of had this conversation with OpenAI, and we're like, cool. First, we need to right-size the contract because things have changed. And second, they were like, look, you know, truthfully, like you were one of 3 systems that we didn't churn because every other system fell over, including our auth system, including our identity systems, like all of them fell over. And you're like for whatever reason, you didn't. And so that was like the initial like kind of seed that's been planted, and we've been working with them now for over 4 years.
Scott, it was not an accident. This goes back to this principle that you said at the beginning, which is like we're between our customers and theirs, and their revenue and correctness matters. We need to build a system that is going to scale and that we can prove will be correct. It wasn't an accident.
No, I agree. I think it's just like the most extreme version I have of like first principles thinking being correct. And just being like, if X is true, then Y is true, you know, like just follow the chain and you get to the system. And so, yes, I agree. It was like kind of the ultimate strategic payoff. And it's really, to me at least, refined to this idea of like, actually, you know, it's like you're living in the land of just like core principles, and you like actually have to build every aspect of your business against those principles. And if you do that and you're right on the bet, then things will work out. And we happen to make the right bet.
I think the other thing that really worked for you guys was your early customers were systems companies.
Yes.
And their bar on correctness was also very, very high.
Yes.
And I think, you know, I think startups can learn a lesson from this, which is like, you have an ICP, you're going to build a product, but even choosing, just like choosing initial employees sets culture. I think choosing initial customers to go deep with sets a bar.
100%. I think it's like the way that we talk about it now at Stripe is like, it's like you work with the tastemakers. And I think tastemakers has a couple of flavors, but one of the flavors that I think is really important is they define the minimum acceptable bar for what a product is. And in a sense, if you're solving the harder problem, then that makes your product better by default. And in some sense, you can't regress below it. And I think that works if you believe that like the highest bar is your differentiation. It is like in a case where you are ultimately going to be an infrastructure player, you want to hold the highest bar you possibly can, and you want your customers to be basically putting so much pressure on you every single day. Like I still remember our first incident where we basically we almost had a misbilling, and it was like we detected it like an hour before the bill run, and we were like, throw the like breaker, like we're not sending invoices out. And what we did instead, and it was like literally, I think in retrospect, it was like $10,000 of invoices. Like we now do, for reference, we now do 2 billion a month. So it's like, it was like de minimis, but we were like, we will not send this out. And we didn't even know if there was an error. We just knew there was a theoretical possibility of there being an error. And so what we did is we like threw the breakers, we jumped on the phone with the customer, and we're like, look, we can't send these invoices because we can't prove they're correct. And then we spent 3 days staying up literally the entire time, hammering like not Coke, but like coffee, just going crazy, just like going and just like debugging, proving correctness. We like literally at one point we're like hand tabulating invoices to make sure they were right. And at the end of it, we're like, cool, everything's provably correct. The system is healed. And then we like shipped the invoices. Now they're 3 days late. The customer was slightly upset. And we're like, cool, like we get it. We know you're upset. We're going to go. I called up Akil, our old friend from Dropbox, and I was like, okay, tell me what gold standard of an incident response is here. And so he like spent 2 hours with me walking through exactly how he would do this. I went and executed the same thing. So that 3-day working 24/7 became 7 days because I'm like, we have to get this incident report correct. We then published it to the user. We gave it full transparency. They turned around and they made it their template for incident response going forward. And it's like, they're like, this is so much better than we do. And we're like, at, whatever, a $10 billion company or whatever. And I was like, and we were at the time, we were, like 12 people or something. And I was like, that is the bar that we are now holding. And it is now like enshrined in legend. We like called it Project Hedgehog. And it was like about how do we build a provably correct system at scale such that we don't detect it by accident an hour before build run? What do we need to do? And like that was, and so we basically stopped product development for 2 months while we went and built that tooling. And that like was the decision that we made. It was incredibly, I mean, it wasn't controversial because I was the person making the decision. I was like convicted on it, but it was definitely one of those moments where you could have easily just like shoved it under the rug and just kept moving forward. And instead we're like, no, we're not allowing ourselves to do that. And I think it kind of goes back to how do you design those principles and how our customer not, been as annoyed or pissed or whatever, like a super legit engineering team, they probably would have let us skate by it and we would have like not done as much. And I think that it was one of these things where ultimately our incentives are aligned. Their incentive is to have correct invoices, build on time. Our incentive is to build a system that produces those and to build bulletproof infra. And now we are working together and that value is worth way more than the contract value. Like we easily spent more in the like overtime work on that one customer for that thing than we ever have made from them. And it's still like the most value accretive thing we ever did.
Yeah, it's set culture inside the team, but it also communicated to your customers, which found its way around.
Yeah.
That you guys were to be trusted.
Yeah, we like I think our first 20 million of ARR was all word of mouth. Like it was all word of mouth, and it was because of incidents like that. And obviously the non-incidents we had, but the like positive references in the market where people are like, these guys are legit. Like who knows if this idea is good, but at least they're legit.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned Stripe in the course of this. Let's talk about that decision to join them and kind of what gave you conviction that was like the right thing for the company at that time.
Yeah, I mean, so we had this first tailwind of infra, we had the second tailwind of AI. I think at some point about a year ago or a little more, Stripe started to notice that usage billing was a thing, and they started to deploy products in market and started to try to put pressure on us. And my view of competition has always been to ignore it. I mean, like to both at turns, like really focus on it as like a gelling force for the company to like use competition to drive urgency towards specific outcomes, but not to obsess with it, not to be like stressed. Like I don't lose sleep about competitors. Like the biggest competitor is yourself 100 times out of 100. And, maybe 1 in 1,000 times, like a competitor actually kills you, but mostly it's like you kill yourself. But competitors are very useful as a leader for driving action that you need to do. So it's like a good stalking horse.
It illuminates.
Exactly.
When you first became CEO, we talked about that because you had a competitor at the time that you were annoyed that your team wasn't learning enough from them.
Yes, exactly. And so how do you use competitors to accomplish the thing that you want your team to go do? And what that means is that like it's like you shouldn't be afraid of them, but you should respect them. And so, and look, Stripe, I think in reality, I think we are almost all born in the image of Stripe. If you work on anything selling to developers, they defined that market, and from principles, from their thinking, all that stuff. Literally, 25% of companies are incorporated using Stripe now. It's like truly like they are the grandfather of all of us in some sense. So, knowing they're coming into the market, has some amount of fear, but in a very literal way, I mean, and we talked about this very early, like we defined our product and our market in a way that was like the literal complement to everything Stripe does. Like, Stripe developer, bottom up, PLG, we top down, sales led, working with public enterprise. And we did that very strategically because we wanted to have a product that worked at all scales of the market. And we believed that fundamentally by starting at the top and working your way down, that was the best way to build this product. There's a million reasons why I think that's true, or why I now know it's true. But that was our bet. And so we basically were betting that Stripe's strategy would not work in the billing market. And so we built the anti-Stripe billing. Okay. So then they started to come after our market. And look, they have 100% brand recognition. They're in 100% of deals. They're in, they are the default choice for every company in Silicon Valley for sure, which is our core market. And so in theory, it's scary. In practice, it was clarifying because when a large business goes out of their way to target you and to build into your market, that means their data says this market is way bigger than you thought it was. And so I'm not like a big like TAM guy, but I was like, sweet. If they think this is real, then this is real. And so we just went hard after them and, spent a lot of time, like the kind of core idea was like when a competitor steps into your space, especially with their first product, there is this idea that like it's like tentative. It's their 0 to 1 product. So how do large companies work? Large companies work, they want to win. So if you can punch them in the nose and prove that you're not going anywhere and that you are going to win this space, even if it takes you like 20 years and your entire life, then they're going to back off in some way or they're going to buy you. And so our entire thought was like, look, we're just going to compete like hell. We're going to go hard after every one of these accounts. We're going to do what we do uniquely, which is like bring our entire selves and our entire product to the bear on this market. And we're just going to compete like hell. And so we did that for 2 quarters. At the end of those 2 quarters, I got a call from Patrick and Will, and I was like, let's talk. And in that conversation, I became convinced of 2 things. One, they believed the market was as big as I did. They were like as ambitious as me in this market. And this is like my life's work. So I'm like, okay, they get it. They were pitching me my vision. I mean, like, they'd come to it organically. And I was like, okay, if 2 smart people have triangulated to the same outcome using completely disparate data, then maybe it's true. And they're willing to like go after it. So I'm like, okay. Second thing that came away is if you've ever met them, they're literally some of the most impressive people in the world. Like their level of intelligence, just speed on the uptake, completeness of thinking is just kind of unprecedented. And I've talked to a lot of people about what I do. I am never impressed by people in my domain not because people are dumb. I've thought about it like literally thousands of times more than anyone. They've thought about it a fraction as much as me, and they were as smart as me. And I'm like, okay, well, in that case, like, look, they want what we're doing. They see the same vision. And like, I firmly believe that like, for me at least, I want to make this thing real. And I want to do it with people that I respect. And these are people that like I instantly respected and honestly felt in awe that they'd even talk to me. And so it's one of these things where I like spent a bunch of time with them. I convinced myself that their strategy was sound if we worked together. It was a way of accelerating our vision, and it was to do the thing that is very hard in Silicon Valley, which is make investors happy at the same time. And like, and around the same time, I talked to a bunch of folks, including yourself, including Elad. And basically I was just like, look, how do you think about this stuff? And they're like, look, these scenarios never happen. And so if they're happening, like you should heavily consider it. And I am convinced that had we said no, we would still be out there in the market and we would still win. But what I realize is this accelerates my dream by like 10 years. And it makes it much more likely to happen. And I get to go do it at world scale now. And so I get to just like, the analogy I use is we're playing Chutes and Ladders. It's like we're in row 2 of 10 and there's a fucking ladder that goes straight to the end or like maybe the 9th row. And I'm like, of course I'm taking that ladder. Like, why would I not take that ladder? I get to go do this at world scale and work with the best people in the world on this problem. Like, I would be so silly not to do it. And investors get to come away happy. Like, that was a win-win-win.
Yeah, you're right. Patrick and Will are both like super impressive, and Joe Lacasse has been an investor in Stripe for years and years and years, and we've had the fortune of working with them, and incredibly prescient
Yes.
and incredibly smart people. And the thing you may not know is when I wrote the seed memo, the internal memo for the investment into Metronome way back in 2019, in the risks section is if Stripe decides to get into billing around usage-based billing like in a serious way and decouples this from their transaction system, we're gonna have to think this through. So it's basically what it says, you know. So when I first started talking about it, when I was actually talking to Will about what they were doing in billing, I was like, okay, something could happen here. And sure enough, you ended up calling me not too much longer later.
Yeah.
It's a great story. We're really happy that you're part of Stripe now, and for General Catalyst, the idea that the value you've created, we both did did great by Metronome, but we're also able to compound this, and Stripe got a great leader in you to take this on and help them kind of make this an even bigger business.
Yeah, honestly, I would say I'm 3 months in. For me, this is like a life decision. Like, I love running startups. I love the game. Stripe is like that, but at 10,000 people scale, at hundreds of, I don't even know, billions, huge scale. And it like legitimately just feels like it's getting started. And so it's just like it's very weird actually stepping in, because very quickly I was working more hours than at a startup. I was like urgently just doing all these things and seeing these people that I've admired from afar forever. They're just like, their brain is just as broken as mine. Like, they're like grinding it out at 2 a.m. on a Friday. And it's like, why? And I've actually asked them, I was like, why are you doing this? Like, what, like legitimately, like, you're one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the history of Silicon Valley. Like, why are you still doing this? And the answer was like ridiculously humble and very straightforward. It's like the team and the work. And I was like, that is all I want to do as like a non-recovering workaholic. I was just like, I want to be at a place where I can plow my like time, effort, energy into a hard problem and get rewarded for it and get to work with other people who are going to do the same. And like I talked to lots of folks in this journey, and like they were one of the very few places that actually lived up to that. And then now I've been 3 months on the other side, and I would say I, in most ways, underestimated how good of a fit it was, and just incredibly appreciative to you and General Catalyst, but also to Stripe for taking a chance. I feel like, we've definitely, it was one of those rare everyone wins situations, and I'm definitely not one to pass those up.
Yeah. Well, congrats. You built a great company, and I know you're going to build a great chapter at Stripe.
Awesome.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.